Alright, so we're going to talk some more about quadrilaterals today. And we have been learning, so far we have learned about parallelograms and rectangles. Today we're also going to learn about a rhombus and a square. So if you'll recall, quadrilaterals can be parallelograms. Parallelograms can be rectangles, and that's what we've learned so far. What we are going to continue to learn about today is that a parallelogram could also be a rhombus. So if something is a parallelogram, it can then go into one of two categories, a rhombus or a rectangle. Now, there are sometimes parallelograms that are neither a rhombus nor a rectangle. Okay, so it just sometimes happens that it's one or the other. And then squares, well, squares are a combination of a rhombus and a rectangle. So if you have not drawn this chart already, please do so at this time because it will help you significantly on the quiz and on the notes as well. And remember that, as we talked about last time, if you're going up the chart, then it is always true. So that means, like, if I'm talking about squares, well, squares are always quadrilaterals because I'm going up the chart to get there. If I'm going down the chart, it is only sometimes true. So sometimes quadrilaterals are squares. Sometimes quadrilaterals are a rhombus. Sometimes a parallelogram is a square. And sometimes a rhombus is a square. One last thing that you might want to write down is it helps to know what exactly a rhombus is and what a square is. Well, you're used to squares. You know, squares have 4 right angles and they have 4 equal sides. Well, a rhombus is kind of the same concept, except it is more like it's a slanted square. So it's like a parallelogram because it's slanted, but it's like a square because all of the 4 sides are equal. So hopefully that diagram should help you on this section. It says quadrilaterals are always, sometimes, or never rectangles, and it is sometimes rectangles. Rectangles are, however, always quadrilaterals, and parallelograms are sometimes a rectangle. We're first going to talk about a rhombus. A rhombus is a quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides. So that's what makes it a rhombus, is that it has 4 congruent sides. And rhombi are always parallelograms. And the only time a rhombus can be a rectangle is when its angles are right angles. In other words, when it's a square. So now here's something that's unique only to the rhombus. Well, it's not only to the rhombus, but it starts with a rhombus. Is that the diagonals are perpendicular. And the word perpendicular means that they meet at a 90-degree angle. So when you have a rhombus, their diagonals form 4 90-degree angles. Another thing that makes the rhombus unique is that each diagonal of a rhombus bisects a pair of opposite angles. Okay, so I'm going to draw a picture over here for you. So if I have a rhombus, well, the first thing we know is that if I draw in my diagonals, and we just pretend that my drawings are correct, by the way, this angle is a right angle, this angle is a right angle, this is a right angle, and this is a right angle. That's something that makes it true about a rhombus. The second thing that we just learned is that it bisects a pair of opposite angles. So this and this are congruent to that and that. And these two up here are also congruent to one another and to the 2 at the bottom. Okay? Alright, so the next thing says if a parallelogram has 2 adjacent sides that are adjacent and congruent sides, let's word it that way, adjacent congruent sides, then it's a rhombus. So what they're telling us is if we have a shape here, and what we know is that this angle and this angle are congruent. We know they're congruent because they're giving that to us. They're adjacent because they're next to each other. Then that makes it a rhombus because we learned that a parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent. Then it says a square is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. So since squares are at the very, very, very bottom of our diagram that we drew earlier, everything that's true about a quadrilateral, everything that's true about a rhombus and a rectangle and a parallelogram has to be true about a square. So since rhombus has all congruent sides, and a rectangle has all right angles, then a square gets to have all of those. So rectangles are sometimes squares, but squares are always a rhombus, and a rhombus is sometimes a square. Remember, if you're going down the chart, it's sometimes; going up the chart, it's always. So given that ABCD is a rhombus, find the value of x. Well, if this is a rhombus, then they told us the only thing we know about an angle is that this angle here in the middle is 90 degrees. And we do know, just because this forms a triangle in here, we can call this a triangle because it is, that all the angles have to add up to 180. So that means that x plus 14 plus 90 has to equal 180 degrees. So I'm going to combine my like terms before I solve. I have x, and then I have 14 and 90. So that gives me 2x plus 104 equals 180. And I'm just solving this for x. So in order to do that, I'm going to minus 104 from both sides. So I'm left with 2x equals 76. And for my last step, I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I get that x equals 38. And the question said, given that ABCD is a rhombus, find the value of x. Well, we just did. X was 38. Looking at the practice problems, number 1. Ask us for the measure of angle AEB. Well, it says, if you go back to the before that, it said, given that each shape is a rhombus, find the missing information. So if this is a rhombus, then we know that when the diagonals intersect, they form a 90-degree angle. So AEB, that's the angle made by connecting those 3 together, has to be 90 degrees. Number 3, if CAB, let's draw that, CAB measures 108, what is the measure of CAD? I'm going to draw this one in pink. So if we think back to what else we learned about our diagonals, it said that the diagonals bisect the opposite side. That means it splits it in half. So if the whole thing is 108, we just need to know what half of that is. To find that, we do 108 divided by 2. And that gives me 54. So this part in pink over here is going to be 54 degrees. Alright, moving on to number 5. What is the value of x? Well, again, I know this is a rhombus. So just like in problem 1, I know this is a right angle. So that means that x plus x minus 18 plus 90 has to equal 180. It's my job to solve. So I'm going to combine my like terms. So my like terms would be x and minus 18 and plus 90. X plus x is going to be 2x. Minus 18 plus 90 is going to be 72, and it is positive, equals 180. I'm going to subtract 72 from both sides, and I get that 2x equals 108. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 2, and I get that x equals 54. So the x value here is 54. Alright, moving on to number 7. 7 again says, what is the value of x? Well, this is a little bit more difficult because it didn't really give us a whole lot. But we do know if this is a rhombus, this angle and that angle are equal. That means that 4x must equal 5x minus 10. So I need to get x's on one side and my numbers on the other. So I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. So I get that negative 1x equals negative 10. To get x by itself, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. And I get that x equals positive 10. Number 9 is going to be the exact same type of problem. That 32 equals 8x. So I'm going to divide both sides by 8. And x equals 4.